Hello and welcome to the Violin Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Mrugala, where I interview violinists from around the world. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Please be sure to subscribe for future episodes and give us a 5-star rating. My guest today is one of Ireland's most recognized artists performing as a soloist all around the world. He is the founder of Steel Records, which has released 4 critically acclaimed albums and will be releasing an album with the Janacek Philharmonic, conducted by Mark Shapiro, featuring works by Philip Glass, and that'll be released in the fall of 2020. Looking forward to that conversation. And please let me welcome Gregory Harrington to the Violin Podcast. Greg, great to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on to the Violin Podcast. How are you doing during the craziness of this pandemic? You know, I felt like I've had multiple conversations with multiple musicians about how they're doing during this pandemic. How are you doing?
Well, Eric, I'm surviving, as they say. First and foremost, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to chat with you, and I'm very much looking forward to this. As I said, really enjoyed many of your podcasts, so this should be a fun journey.
Surely.
I think I'm in New York City, and I've been here more or less for the duration of the pandemic. So it's been quite the ride. It's been quite the surreal experience. And we're at a stage where we're opening up now, and it's much more socially distant social, which is a good thing. But, personally doing okay. I don't see and that this is something we can touch on, later, just in terms of how classical music and how musicians navigate through this for the 6 to 12 to 18 months future. But it's going to be a hard transition out of this, where life as we knew it, classical music as we knew it, is going to have to look at itself under a lens and see where to go.
Yeah, and of course we'll touch base on all of that later on in the podcast. But first, let's get to know you. Who are you? Who is Gregory Harrington? How did you get started on the violin? And tell us about your journey through the violin and how that kind of guided you throughout your journey in life and to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I started at the age of 4. I was born in Dublin, raised in Dublin, and I moved to New York in 1999. So I did my early 20s. But I started.
By the way, the beer is good in Dublin, right?
The Guinness is quite spectacular.
Oh man, I could use a Guinness right now.
As we say, it's always 5 o'clock somewhere. So grew up in Dublin. Well, I was 4 when I first experienced a violin. I was with my mother in the RDS Horse Show, which is this international horse jumping festival or tournament. And there was a string quartet playing in the corner, and I was sort of knee high to a grasshopper. And I for some reason, I just loved the sound of the violin, and I tugged her arm and I pointed to it and I said, I want to play that. And she was so delighted. She just brought me into this music store, McCullough Pickett's, which was the iconic music store at the time, and bought this tiny little violin. And I went in. I started probably a month later. I studied with the same teacher from the age of 4 to 18, and he was wonderful in the sense of I wouldn't say technically phenomenal, but he fostered, and this is a thing that is so important, he fostered the curiosity and brought me through everything I needed, and just in a way that just kept me going forward at the right pace and just hungry to get more. And he didn't have the answers to everything, but it was just, his name was Kevin Kiley, but it was just beautiful how he took me on this journey, and just the more I look back on it, really navigated it so well to keep it from the frustrations. You as a kid, you have natural frustrations, but to take you through everything, from Carl Flesch to Beethoven Violin Concerto. So it was just a beautiful experience with him. And then at the time I was 18, I was doing some recitals. I was doing concerts around Ireland, and I sort of made a decision. Well, I didn't want to necessarily do music in University College Dublin or in Ireland, because I wanted a teacher outside. I wanted a teacher, whether that's in England. And I met this soloist who was remarkable, Murat Bisangaliev, and he was from that Boris Belkin Russian school. He was playing with the National Symphony Orchestra, was at Lalo think it was the Lalo Symphony Espanol, and I went backstage and I met him and we talked, and so he started taking me as a student. So I would go once every 6 weeks over to him for a weekend, and in that sort of old style Russian mentor where you have weekend lessons, and it's just an immersion thing, and it was really, really good for me. So when I went into college, I didn't do music because I was doing so much of it outside anyway. So I actually did a degree in business and Spanish. So majored in finance and marketing, and then a full arts degree in Spanish. And believe it or not, that part I'm so happy I did, because it's enabled me manage and do publicity and marketing and find the whole, to separate the artist from the artistic and that side to the product, and knowing how you navigate that part of it. So that was a very, very valuable 4 years in Dublin and Madrid. And then when I was towards the end of that, I was still doing more concerts and some tours, and I got a job in a company. And so I was doing in the finance department, treasury department, finance department, and I was working there 6 months full time, just to get a little bit more money together, so I could just go to England and stuff like that. And then the CEO at the time, because I'd made my mind up, so okay, I need to just prep for auditions for about another year, and then go over to the US and try and see what I can do there. And the CEO was at a recital I was giving, and I already had that little entrepreneurial side. I was getting sponsorships from smaller companies, from the Arnott's, which would be the equivalent of Macy's. So you have that sort of smaller stuff, and some insurance companies to help you through this. And then he said, "Look, what can I do for you?" And at the time, I think it was towards the end, of a 2-year stint that I'd done, or a 1.5-year stint. And I said, "Well, actually, I need this amount for college for the next 3 or so years in the US." And I said, "If you can help."
That's a bold ask, by the way.
Yeah, I know. And he was sort of phenomenal. I could see the smile on his face when I said it, because I was this sort of, and I was really sharp with what I did, because I was, at the time, I was charging euro. We were doing the euro from the Irish, but it was all this stuff in the treasury that we were working on, which I was loving and was being really helpful in what I was doing at the company. So I knew he had a smile on his face when I said it, and he came back to me a week later. He said, "You know something? This is what I'll do. I'm going to sponsor whatever your tuition cost is. I'm going to give you half of it." So it was a wonderful gesture. And it was one that really, really helped me, because, when you're coming such a long way, it is a hard thing to do, to get up from your country, leave. And I think, when you want something, when, there is no other alternative. Yes, I could have gone back and I could have done finance or management consulting or that stuff, and I would have probably loved it. But my heart has always been, I want to be on stages. I want to be in front of people. I want to be, whether that's a stage of 3 people or 80,000, you want to be able to touch somebody's life in a way that they walk away and they say, "I loved that." And that has always been, for want of a better word, drug. Like every performer, like every artist that picks up a musical instrument and just wants to convey what they feel, no matter what level it is. And that is the beauty. It's in an art form where we look for such perfection. It's really about, can you do something beautiful enough that just affects somebody else? And that's all you got to do. And when you do that, I think, it's a beautiful journey. But anyway, so just to wrap that part up, yeah, he was wonderful, and I'm still in touch with him 20 years later. He was just great. And I came over to New York and did my auditions. What's the word? Yeah, I did such a horrendous audition for Juilliard. It was just open that swallow you up, right? It was horrendous. And I did a pretty, my other two were fine, and they were pretty good. So I ended up studying with Sally Thomas in Manus. And I actually hope that this is probably the long-winded version of the questions you asked me, but anyway, bear with me, I'm almost there. But and she was great.
By the way, I'm loving all of this. I love all of
Right,
this
right,
at what you're saying, and I'm taking notes as we speak because there are a lot of topics that I
yeah.
resonate with, and we'll get to all of it. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and
Do stop me or mute me or do whatever you need, whatever you need. But
I don't think that'll make me a good podcast host if I just like, okay, let's just mute the guests and now.
probably not. Yeah, okay, I get that. So I came over to Sally Thomas and I studied with Marat for a number of years, and she was great. She was great. I don't think personally it was the right fit, but there's a lot of stuff that I appreciated. So and that's the thing about teachers. There has to be an emotional fit, and that's why I didn't necessarily I adored my first teacher so much because he got it. And so she's a wonderful teacher, and but we didn't gel. So after her, I went to a violinist by the name of Eric Friedman, who was, he recorded with Heifetz. He was Heifel's pupil and Milstein's pupil and Galamian's pupil, and he was just incredible. So I had a wonderful relationship with him, and I remember the first thing he said to me. He said, because I wrote to him, I said, look, I need help, and this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel on how I need to do it. We went up, and I went up to his Yale studio. I took the train up one morning, and he said, Greg, he said, you've got the most beautiful bow change I've seen in years. He said, but he said, unless you really get this, and it's good, but it's nowhere where you need to be to do that, to get to here. He said, you'll never progress any further. And I said, okay, Grant. And he said, I will teach you everything you need to know about the functionality of playing a violin in 12 lessons. And he said, after that, he said, truthfully, if you really, really, really want to learn the musical side of this, you explore how piano players, with such a percussive instrument, get such expressive musicality. And, he and I just, I will say this much, it was black and white. He made it so crystal clear, and his lessons were just incredible. And so I really, there was a part of him, there was a part storyteller, which I adored, whether it's stories about Oistrakh or his lessons with Friedman, or with Heifetz, or real life things on stage with Ozawa or whoever he had recorded with, or with Previn or whatnot, that just made sense. He passed a number of years after I started, but he was just, but that's really how that was my introduction into America,
and here you are. You stayed since.
I stayed since. Yeah, I sort of won a little competition. I've been working and touring and traveling, and creating a niche and creating a way where you can entertain and perform concerts and classical series, and I write, and but yes, it's been, I will say this, it's been a beautiful journey, sometimes tough, sometimes exhilarating, but just it's been some journey.
Yeah, and people often forget that you have like these Instagram violinists who have like over 40,000, 50,000 followers. They go through their ups and downs too, and I've interviewed a few of them on the Violin Podcast and hope to interview many more. But I want to touch base on a topic that we also discussed on the Violin Podcast, is that bond between the student and the teacher. And you had a teacher for, 14 years, from 4 to 18. That's quite a long time. And I share a very similar experience where I took violin lessons with my aunt for around 10 years, maybe a little over 10 years. And up until conservatory, I had the very similar situation. But for one, she was family, and two, we also kind of gelled. But what was the advantage of like having a violin teacher for that long? Most students, or most parents for that matter, would want a student to, or their kid to actually have different teachers to get different perspectives. Why go with this one teacher for 14 years? I mean, you said that there was that emotional connection, right?
Yes. Good. Great question. I think trust was one. So I trusted him. He took me through everything progressively that I needed to go through, whether it's all the car flash, Shevchik, all the concerti. He took me through all of this. There was certain things from a performer's level on stage, of sitting on stage, that he couldn't take me through. But then, there were certain things that Sally Thomas couldn't take me through either, that Eric could, and vice versa. So there's everything with different teachers, and I think it's their understanding of, with any teacher, it's their understanding of your needs right now. And you look at any, I'm a big believer, if you want to learn, you read an autobiography. And I love sports and I love art, and you read Picasso, you read Alex Ferguson, or Vince Lombardi, or whoever it is, and it's an ability to understand what's going on in the player or the student or their mind and how they're processing it. Because you might want to take them on this journey, and there's a part of that that's too hard, and it's and then you can navigate around that, or you can so he seemed to me to be, I was always comfortable and always very challenged, but I was never uncomfortable and just in a way where I didn't want to move forward, or I said, well, I want to give this up, or
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that was, and he introduced me to the recordings of Heifetz, and I was just enthralled, and Sid Kavitsky, and Ralph Holmes, and all these incredible violinists, like the gamut. And he fueled the curiosity in a way that I always wanted to know more. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things a teacher can do.
Right. And I totally agree with you on that, because I realized that during the pandemic, it's also just creating a lot more value for the student. We'll talk about the business side of things as well in a moment, but I think the successful teacher will, of course, inspire the student to learn more and create that curiosity. I think that's super important. Like what I've done that's worked in the past is just like send all my students like a listening assignment on like music that I'm passionate about. And I think, to me, showing that, the teacher is passionate about something, then that passion can be passed down to the students and even the parents too. I think, a lot of making music and learning an instrument, especially the violin, takes a lot of dedication from the parents. I think oftentimes, you can't just kind of throw in your your child into a lesson and be like, I expect everything to kind of happen all at once. It just doesn't happen. Yeah, so inspiring that curiosity is super, super important. That's what I've done with my students. And you said that you were teaching a little bit during this pandemic.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that worked for you during this pandemic as a teacher, as a pedagogue? Because I'm sure that there are teachers and parents who are listening to this podcast, or students for that matter, who are just like, well, I feel like I've done everything and we're approaching the fall. We might return to remote learning. What can I do more? Or what can I do that can be better?
First and foremost, I always think, no matter what and it's no matter what is faced, what comes in front of you, there's always a way to look at it differently. There's always a way to look at it creatively, and there's always a way to make it challenging. I will say that I've actually enjoyed Zoom lessons, and with some students, I've actually been more productive with them because they haven't had other distractions. They're just much more focused, and I've enjoyed that. With some students, they wouldn't be, they haven't been so interested in it's turning that ear on. In a way, so they haven't been interested in really listening, or recording themselves. So pushing them to record and then analyze and just look, and to go deeper into something that where their inner ear and the sound that comes out aren't matched. So what they think they hear and the sound that comes out of the violin, there's a disconnect. And so bridging that gap, that's one of the things that I've found has been really, really good for the students that I'm teaching. Here, there's a sound, but I don't mind. It's hard to get a definitive sound quality to show different tones, but it can be done.
And don't mean to cut you off. What is the age group that you teach?
Anywhere from about 6 to 18.
6 to 18. Okay. Yeah. Generally, I'm the same. Yeah.
Yeah, and I conduct. I have a group that I conduct as well. So, which was more of a challenge actually in this. the pandemic. But yeah, so I have enjoyed it. I think there's ways to there's always ways to challenge different skills with when the landscape in front of you changes.
Yeah, and of course we're continuing to adapt as much as we can. You see orchestras kind of reopening slowly in Europe. You see Vienna, Berlin, or Berlin is doing concerts.
Yeah,
Berlin Phil to be
yeah,
exact. And however, like I noticed that there are some photos that kind of peeked out on the internet that audience members are still doing some social distancing. I think like, to be honest, the testing and the control of the virus turned out to be a lot better controlled in Europe than it is in the US because of wearing masks and whatnot.
yeah,
That's a whole other conversation, right?
yeah. And
But yeah.
I think it comes down to, and don't not getting political. I just think it comes down to a massive cultural difference. And in Europe, I think they were a lot more okay with wearing the mask. I mean, there was one or two experiments that didn't work, whether it's Sweden and the UK a little bit, but
Right, Sweden decided to be like,
yeah,
nope, we're not doing the masks.
yeah. But it's how you get a culture on board and challenge them thinking about their norms in a way that's healthy, and that's the big problem in the US.
Yeah, definitely. And going off of going completely in a different direction from COVID-19, because we've talked about COVID-19 quite a bit on the podcast, and sometimes that could be a Debbie Downer, right? But I want to talk about what you mentioned about your business degree, because
Yes.
business degrees are important, but how are you going to, one of my passions is how to create this connection between business and music, especially in classical music, right? Because there are a lot of artists who are good at being artists, right? But then once they approach the real world, they have to win a competition that will offer them some management, that will offer them concerts, and then the cycle goes on and on and on. Unless you go to like a top conservatory like Curtis or Colburn or something like that, right?
It's
So
still hard. It's still hard when you
it's
do
still hard. It's still hard, and honestly, it gets even harder. It doesn't get any easier for us as musicians. But hopefully, with this podcast, it kind of educates the people who kind of need to listen to this, and hopefully, you can offer some valuable advice. So, what have you taken from your business degree into the music world? Because I think that's a struggle for a lot of artists. Well, like I'm practicing so much, 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day. Even I know many of my quartet friends and colleagues who are like, I'm practicing so much, but I don't know how to adapt. I don't know how to earn money besides just doing an occasional wedding gig or trying to win a competition. So what are your thoughts on that, and how did you approach the situation differently?
Well, I think if I start on this is like Pandora's box for me, because it's the one thing that I'm like, the entrepreneurial side of this is so important, because I've always said I want to, you can play your instrument, but you also have to make a living, and a good living. And it starts with realizing that as an individual, quartet, trio, whatever it is you are, you're a product as opposed to the artist. And if you can detach yourself from the product, because the one thing that cripples us as musicians is the rejection. And we have this complete heartbreaking feel when we get that rejection, because we take it so personally. And I think once you get past that and realize that you are offering a service, that you are a product, and that there's a complete disconnect, then you can start making that transition. So it's from there you find where, like, nobody wants to hear Greg Harrington play Beethoven if they have 140 other violinists who are offering to play Beethoven, and 7 of them are, you have your Josh Bell or Vengerov, or a whole no. But if you are, so you're trying to find out where you're unique and where your niche is, and it's all about understanding. I mean, and I always say this: you have to understand who your audience is, because there's no point in playing contemporary music to an audience that want to hear crossover or or jazz or whatever. So it's really, really about understanding your audience. And once, finding, and then there are so it's about finding how are you different? How do you differentiate yourself? Why is your product so good? Why is it, why should there be any reason that the presenter doesn't hire you? And from there, you have your list. For me, it's orchestras and festivals and chamber music series, or recital series. And that's the traditional thing. But the other part of that is then, knowing that your audience is so diverse. So the part that I love is, creating something that's new, whether that's, I work with, depending on whether it's a jazz quartet or and I write and arrange, whether it's that or whether it's working with my two cellists, and you create, whether you're doing gala events or special private events for a Fortune 500 company.
Right. And by the way, just for the record, I mentioned wedding gigs and whatnot. Doing wedding gigs is not a bad thing. There are a lot of very successful companies, and I've done plenty of wedding gigs too for different occasions. And you never know who you might meet through those wedding gigs or through those, Fortune 500 events. So you really never know.
It's all about networking and defining your audience and building your audience, and you're constantly building that audience. And the only way people will hear you or find out about you is if you get out there and play. So weddings, anything, so some of them will be your cash cow. Some of them, like, there are certain concerts that you'll play that will have very little income, but they will be so rewarding. So you might get some incredible reviews for it. You might get some, you might get some fantastic footage. You might have a presenter in there, or you might have an agent in there. So there's always a trade-off with some of those. Others, you might have an excellent fee. It mightn't be the most delightful thing. You might want to do some wedding music. You get a nice fee. It just depends on. You have to bring all these things into the mix to make sure that you are, make sure you have a wide enough portfolio of services to offer that a lot of people can buy.
And that was going to be my next point, is diversifying yourself. You don't, yes, you have to find a niche, right? But it's also important, if you're starting out, if you're a young violinist listening to this podcast, it's kind of important to diversify a little bit first, so that way you understand what you don't like. I think for me, growing in my careers, I'm still growing, we're all growing as violinists and artists. We never stop growing. If we stay still, then, we rot. But I think that, there was a moment between my bachelor's and my master's where I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. A lot of people who listen to the podcast are familiar with my Utah Symphony audition, where I went to Utah and I did the first round. Didn't make past the first round, but then on the flight back, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I did not find any joy in this process. So that was very clear to me, where I did not want to do that. I didn't like doing it. So I'm like, okay, well, why bother? And I still practice my orchestra excerpts. Don't get me wrong. It's like good etude practice and whatnot, right? But like, for me, it really offered me a lot of clarity. Because I now I can cross it off my list. I'm like, okay, maybe being a full-time orchestra musician is not for me. And maybe this is not for me. Maybe that's not for me. And then the moment you start kind of crossing those things off your list, then your vision and your niche becomes a lot clearer, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And yeah, so it's defining your vision and your niche and knowing what you want. But it's also, and there's one other thing that I would say about that is that we take failure so personally, right? So I would always say every no is one step closer to a yes. And you have to learn how to do processes, and you have to keep, like, I will go out specifically not regarding failure as a negative thing, because you learn so much about your character and how you do it right. And it's through that process that's the fascinating part for me. So, I will test so many things on smaller audience, on different audiences first, and not be afraid to make those mistakes, or not be afraid to go for it, knowing that it might not work. Because
Right.
then when you're in that high pressure situation where you have, whether it's for the UN, whether it's on a concert, or whether you've got a phenomenal reviewer there, and you know, okay, I've done this before, I've done this so many times, 15, 25, 35 times. I know where my failures have been, and I know how to navigate through this now. So I think that there's, character-wise, there's always something about not giving up, and always, if you are true to your vision, nothing's going to stop you. Like, it's, you know, if you're really true to your vision, you know what you want, nothing will stop you doing what you love and figuring out a way how to get that.
Of course, yeah. And you talked about failures, right? Violinists, we're always trying to strive for that perfection, right?
Yeah.
Because Beethoven Violin Concerto has been performed thousands, if not millions of times already, and we know how it sounds, right? So,
Yeah.
the moment you play a wrong note, everybody's going to know that you made a mistake, right? So that, I think that is the downside of classical music. If I say that there's a lot of positive, but there's a downside, that oftentimes we look at these great concertos, these great sonatas, and we listen to them over and over and over again, and we don't grow if we don't fail. That's just in anything in life. And violence, we have to learn how to fail. For one, we're used to failing, but then you add like the business side into the mix, then that's the whole idea of being an entrepreneur, right? Is about trying, trial and error, and having a product. Will the product give me a return on investment? And I think all of those things need to be relevant in this day and age, because I think the more violinists are out there, the more like niche driven you need to be. At first, like I said, you have diversified to see what you like and what you don't like, but then at the end of the day, find that niche, make sure you like and you love that niche, because I've said this before, your vibe attracts your tribe.
That's
And
true. That's true.
it's so true. And I think that if you know who you are as a violinist, what kind of repertoire you like to play, you're going to attract that audience no matter what. So speaking of repertoire and music, you have a diverse portfolio of different kinds of music. You have a Bach album, you're doing a Philip Glass. Tell me your thoughts on this music.
I gotta say, look, music it's the closest thing to, it's just beautiful. Right? So you always have to play something that you organically feel and that speaks to you, and that you feel you can just give your interpretation on, or put your stamp on what a composer's saying. So whether that's James McMillan, who's this incredible Scottish composer, did an album of his material, or Bach, and like, I've been fascinated with writing transcriptions, and it's always part of the educate yourself, and and so did orchestration and Juilliard, and just all that sort of thing. Then you just have to jump in there and do what you love. So the Bach album was Transcriptions and Variations. So it was the Chicane and a number of other beautiful pieces from the sonatas and partitas, plus the toccata and fugue. So I wrote a transcription for that, and the Goldbergs, the aria from the Goldberg, and so those things were things that were in my head for so long. The last album last year was sort of dedicated to Miles Davis, and it's fascinating where like classical is every dot and every note and every slur, and has such a distinct meaning within classical, like Beethoven to Brahms, and they differ from those, and they all mean something so specific to Miles Davis, where you just get a lead sheet. Yet the end product is the exact same. You are giving something to a listener that needs no alphabet to understand what the emotion is. So anybody that sits down, if you have the emotion and you just let go on that piece, whether it's Miles Davis, whether it's Vengerov, and the listener will get that same enjoyment, because it's done so beautifully. So the Miles Davis album, recorded with drums, bass, and piano, and it was very much that exploration of the Charlie Parker sound, John Coltrane, And because no one had ever done that on a violin before. You had some Grappelli, you had Menuhin trying to do with Grappelli, but nobody had ever, you had a little bit of Nigel Kennedy doing it. So it was about trying to find that platform. And what I loved was the jazz magazines adored it, and I got such fantastic traction and reviews from that. So it was really that is an album that I love for that reason. Up to this one, this is recording Philip Glass's music, and at the time the American Four Seasons, which is a second violin concerto, it's been recorded by Robert McDuffie, who was written for and who did a beautiful live recording with Maren Alsop and I think it's the London Symphony or the Toronto, anyway, but it was a beautiful recording, live recording. And then Gidon Kramer came out and just basically did Gidon Kramer. He is the most impeccable contemporary musician in general. I mean,
musician in general, yeah. I mean, he is a phenomenal violinist, Gidon Kramer.
I will say that, as violinists, we are so easy to knock other violinists without having walked a mile in their shoe or without having even understand what they do. And there isn't a single violinist that I don't respect. I mean,
that's true. You're so right. You have a lot of people who are trolling on the internet and be like, yeah, this person plays all right, but this person plays better.
Yeah,
right.
And it's like, I think we're in an age where you have a person on the couch with opposable thumbs who just wants to, who hasn't really got out there and done anything, but who just wants to vent. And that's great and good for them. But I have just such respect for any violinist who gets up there and does it, because it takes so much more to and it's an easy thing to knock. So Kramer, I adore everything he does, but it's just, I don't think I hear a contemporary recording of his where I question, I don't think he should have done that. It's just, it sounds so logically beautiful what he does. So those were the two recordings, and I said I wanted to, rather than try and recreate anything that's done, I wanted to give a slightly romanticized reading of Philip Glass, because I had that, because Eric Friedman was just incredible, and he had that influence of Hilton Milstein and Heifetz, and just, I love that sound. I want to see, could I do something that nobody else had done? Because that's the only reason you do it, right? Is it unique? Because nobody wants to hear what everybody else has done. So it like the recording, I love it, and it's like anything. You're going to get people that don't like it. You're going to get people that do like it. It is what it is. It's something that I am
right.
I love doing,
and by the way, like, it's okay if people don't like your stuff too. Yeah. Everybody has different tastes. I can't tell you, like, I did a tour to Chicago 2 years ago, and people like the Brahms more than they did the Beethoven sonata, and and that was just like an interesting observation. I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay, that's interesting that you thought that. I'm like, yeah. So
So it's, and that's the detachment. It's wonderful when people do, and it's perfectly fine when people don't. But the other part of that album, which was really I'm so happy about, is, and this took so much work to do, but I've always loved movie music and always been attracted to the sounds ever since Michael Giacchino did Star Trek in 2009, and the effect, like, I never really listened so intently or understood that it was another character of a movie. So I was at the Hours, which is Meryl Streep and Nicole Kidman, amongst others, is Philip Glass did the score of that, and it was a beautiful score. And I just said, something, for this album, I want to record the second violin concerto, but let me create a suite. So I picked the pieces, wrote this 18-minute suite, and very much a throwback to that Heifetz and Milstein transcription and Kreisler transcription, or actually Heifetz and Milstein, because Kreisler has this saccharine sweet, beautiful transcription way that he does it. And it was just, I wanted to throw back to that old sort of virtuoso violin way of doing it within this contemporary minimalistic framework, and it's a beautiful recording. So I've, and something like this takes so long to go through, to secure the rights to not only write thing and make sure you can do it in such a small period with an orchestra, and make sure that everything is done so that when the orchestra go in, they just read because they, you know, because if the reality of it is they might not have time to rehearse it.
That's true. Yeah. And actually Christian Habel, who actually is a friend of yours, I know now, talks about that in his episode where, you know, you get the charts the day of, you got to read it. And if the composer or the orchestrator doesn't have the right markings, then that kind of ruins the flow of the session.
Absolutely. You know, and Philip Glass is the repetitiveness of it. So I remember we had a conversation, and Mark, I actually met Mark through studying conducting with him, because that was another thing I just wanted to, in order to really understand things more, you just got to go on the other side and feel what that connection is. And it took me in a beautiful way, parts of score reading, like parts of understanding the score that I hadn't before, and so that was beautiful. But Mark and I had this great relationship, and you know, so when he conducted, it was a lovely, and this is the thing about trust. When you're working with conductors, if you know when you trust them, you can go somewhere in a very finite point, you know, if you have 4 days to rehearse, then yeah, you can take your time and do things. If you have 2 days to record 60 minutes of music nonstop, you know, you really have to understand that the relationship between the conductor and soloist, so that it's that there's so much nonverbal, and it just goes. But like, even when we were doing that, the double bassist would say, look, this is just nuts, like the way Glass has scored this. So here's your option. We can rehearse it twice and record it once. We can rehearse it once and record it twice, or we can record it 3 times in a row. Your call, but we're not doing it any more than 3 times. You know, so
Yeah, it does happen though. It really does happen. Like at a session, you're like, you have such a limited amount of time.
Yeah,
and time is money in a session. So,
and you really have to know how to manage the time and be so, like, you're a project manager, you're everything, and you just nail it down. And some musicians don't want to be there, some do, some, you know, so it's you know, when you have an orchestra of 60 musicians, it's how you just energize each. It's quite a, it was a fantastic recording experience, but like it is exhausting. So
and let this be a lesson for anyone who wants to get into the recording industry. Please give us parts that are prepared, please. Just like, you know, just do us a big favor. If you want us to like you, just like have everything done, you know, make sure everything is addressed, no mistakes. And I guarantee, like, it's a lot of work, but I trust you. Trust me, it's worth it. So worth it. And I'm sure Christian Habel is probably listening to the podcast and be like, yes, Eric. Yes, they're exactly talking the right thing.
Yeah, but I mean, there wasn't, like, when I wrote this, I played every single part, you know, and made sure, you know, so you just have to be OCD about it, because you don't have the time or the expense to not be.
And this recording that you did with the Janacek Philharmonic, was that through your record label with Astil Records? Yeah. So I want to talk about your record label, because people who are probably wanting to record something, they can probably do it indie and without no record label, but you founded a record label and you have 4 albums with this record label. Talk to us about how it feels, or what it's like to start a record label, and like what are the ins and outs, because you have that business degree, so you have this organizational skills that people need to run a record label like that. But like, tell us what you did, what worked, what didn't, and go from there.
I think when I was starting out to record, and I'd gone to so many more indie labels and had to speak to conversations with managers, and I'm thinking, you know, they all, like, there was nothing attractive about any of the deals, right? And that's across the board to any artist. And you don't have control of the branding, the imaging, the vision. You can do you record all the music, you provide the master, you put all that expense in. You know, in some cases, a label would say, look, you will earn money after you we sell 1,000 CDs. And in contemporary music, you know, even on Billboard, no way, you know, certain artists don't even sell 500 CDs lifetime in a recording, right? So that, like to pay and just give so much money up for the master, and just to give all the rights away, just didn't make sense to me, and then have no control over the publicity or the marketing.
Again,
Basically,
right. The return on investment didn't make
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
So there was literally none.
Zero. Yeah.
So I had a very long vision, and still, so I still know where the you know where your long, medium, short visions are, but I knew exactly where I wanted to go with this label, and have the artistic creativity, and just to be the one that says yes, no, just decide, photo shoots, content, musicians you work with, studios you work with. And it's like anything, you network and you make phone calls. And like I think there's there are certain days where you might do a 19-hour day, and 18 of that will be on the phones or on emails, or or just fine tuning every little small detail, and but you have to give yourself the leeway to say, okay, this is the time I need to do this. Maybe I don't take a concert here, here on this time or that time or whatnot, and you can pick. But it's the creative output and the creative control was the thing that I wanted, because I knew where I wanted to navigate this, and how to sort of release them and create that portfolio of work.
Yeah, and you have control over the entire process. I can't tell you how many times in my career where I'm like, this is not what I wanted. I did this, but this is not what I wanted. Like I have this vision in my head. This is not what it was supposed to look like. And I think that's, again, the beauty of that, like that entrepreneurial mindset. We're like, well, I can do it myself because I know how to do it myself. And that's also a very important trait to know. Like if you have the confidence to do something, then do it.
Yeah.
And especially as a musician, like don't worry about being perfect right away. Like before I started the Violin Podcast, I've done maybe 45 episodes of my other podcast, which is Everyday Musician. Like you learn along the way. And I think, you learn along the way. And I'm sure like when you were starting your record label that it wasn't like perfect off the bat, right?
No. But I mean, I think it's Richard Branson. He had an interesting quote. And he said, always say yes, and then figure out how to do it after you've said yes. He said, because, if you don't, you'll lose the opportunity. And in a lot of cases, it's even with music. And I think we can all relate to this, where, you will learn a piece of music in exactly the amount of time you are given to learn it. If you have 3 months, you will learn it by the end of that 3 months. If you have 10 days, you will get on stage and you will do it. So
whatever it takes.
Yeah, we're conditioned to it. So if you have an opportunity, it's about not being worried about the failure of it, but jumping in, because you and figuring out and having that sink or swim mentality where this has got to work. Failure is not the option, and having that modified view of failure, because I think as artists we have just pure perfection and nothing else. But just keep going on, because there's no process. I don't think there's any process business wise where your first attempt is the final product that goes out to the public, right? So
totally agree with that.
So in that way, put up your draft, design your CD, see what it looks like, and then if that doesn't go, well, then keep polishing, keep refining, it's the same process with music. It's the same process with writing. It's the same process with arranging. It's just refine, and it's like a snapshot. It's like a photo in time. I'm sure, and you will say this, like if you return to a piece 20 years from now that you recorded now, you'll have a completely different view of it. I know I've different views, but that's how we evolve. So it's of what I recorded, 15 years ago.
I think that's the beauty of music in general, right? Like you're always trying to be better than the previous performance.
Yes.
Always. And I think that's true in business too. You're creating a product that you want to be better when it's version 2.0. Version 3.0 needs to be better than version 2.0. And absolutely. It's just like every single album, every single product, it's not going to start, it may not start the way you want it at first, but then as time goes on, if you continue to commit and do the work and perform on stage, then you'll have a lot of success. So I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Greg, I'm having a blast talking about this
Great.
conversation with
Yeah.
you, and we can spend hours on this on end. But before we go, I kind of want to leave with some closing thoughts.
Okay.
Where do we see ourselves in the music world? I'm not just going to say classical music, but in the
Yeah.
violin world, where do we see ourselves like at the by the end of 2020 and 2021? A lot of people are predicting different things. Do you have a prediction, and or do you have a thought on, when concerts will be safe to go again? Because I think people are craving that connection, that communication that artists give to the audience. I think,
Yeah.
even for myself as an artist, I want to be able to share a message of some kind to my
Yeah.
audience, but I can't do that. And like we have the virtual performances, and that's like a stepping stone, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like the real deal. It's not like going in person. So I want to know your thoughts, some closing thoughts on this.
Yeah. Well, I think, look, everybody's gonna be different, and it's going to take a while for classical music to come back to what we had, and I'm not sure it will for a number of years, even at the end of 2020, even 21. Who knows? I think in America, in the US especially, we're going to have to evolve if we want to survive in the short term. Um, and realizing that it's all about your audience. So, whatever your audience is, knowing that they want to have content, right? And there's a fine balance between being zoomed out and wanting to look at content. So if you can put a quality product up in front of them, they're going to love it. They're going to love, even if that means it's not completely perfect. They're going to love that they'll get the raw passion from you. They'll get you as an artist. So whether that's with your quartet or trio or whatnot. So that's going to define how people want to break forward. I think for me, in the shorter term, trying to find how to, and I think I almost have it, is it's not about, look, because everybody's getting up there and or sorry, there's a commonality of people that are getting up with sort of Facebook Live and whatnot, and it's a lo-fi, and it's a very informal thing, but there's a way to do it where you've got a very high end setup where, and I mean, if for example, you can go into a beautiful studio, live stream, beautiful lighting, and you can take that into, let's say, a CEO's home, live stream for them on a big screen for their dinner party for 4 or 5 people, or for 12 people or whatever it is, and you're doing your 10-minute, 15-minute gala experience, and it's personalized. So if he loves Springsteen, or because I love writing transcriptions, and whether it's Johnny Cash or Nine Inch Nails or U2, or and because then that's another audience of people who love that stuff. But if you can make that highly personal, then they're getting the unique experience. So again, it's about finding out what the audience needs, what the audience will want to pay for, and finding that price point. And I think so that's the way to make money. You can then, I'm working with the Irish Rep Theatre about going in and live streaming with there, and working with the Morgan Library about, can I get, instead of an orchestra, can I for this Philip Glass, for the hours, can we do 5 musicians, microphones, everything socially distant, and create something beautiful for that, which maybe, because there's such a high production cost, there's sync fees from Sony, there's licensing from Shermer, there's everything, even though it's a piece that I wrote, can I make that break even? So it's, but the artistic side of that is really beautiful, and can I get enough people in online to see what I'm doing? So I think it will be about, in the shorter term, just figuring out how to stay relevant and in front of your audience. I think in the medium term is, can you, and put your safety at first. Always, your safety is always first. Do your research, do listen to your science, but is there a way then where we can get small chamber groups, into bigger spaces, and maybe only get 15% of the audience in there, and understand that venues always, like, to make money, venues need to operate on almost a full house. So be willing to say, okay, I'm going to take a cut in fee, because economically the bread isn't, there's only so many ways to split it. And if it's this small, you got to take a smaller cut. But on the flip side, I understand that I'm getting out to my audience, and my audience are seeing me, and I'm still staying relevant, and they're still getting quality. And from there, just I would start reaching out to presenters now, and fostering a relationship. Not and that's the biggest thing, I think. That's the biggest takeaway, where you always want to foster a relationship that's a long-term relationship, as opposed to you go in and say, I want to play in your series, can you help me? Well, somebody's not going to even read that email. But if you're there and say, look, I know what your audience is, I feel what you're, I know you programmed this, and here is something we can do, this adds value to you, this adds value to your series, it's always got to be a value-added product. So I think when you start developing those relationships where you're always looking to add value to a presenter, then that they're the ones that are going to be interested in you to invite you back. And think about your market, whether that's a micro market, which can be lucrative if you work out how to do. Let's say, just take your community. There can be a couple of things you can do in your community. You can work that into your city. You can work that into your state. Just because we have this tendency of thinking, I want to conquer the globe. You can manage you can define your audience by your micro market, your community, your city. I think that's the way I'm thinking of this, and just to try and be ahead of the curve as opposed to be reacting to the curve, in trying to move this forward. But I think with everybody, just make some music, be happy, connect with others in whatever way you can, and just foster great relationships and evolve with this. And I think that's how we're all going to get through this.
Really couldn't have said it better myself, Greg. Thank you so much for coming on to this week's episode of the Violin Podcast. And thank you for offering your wisdom, business related, violin related, how you started a record label. I think there was a lot of great value for our audience today. And if you found a lot of great value in Greg's interview today, please make sure to subscribe. We have many more episodes coming on our way, and we hope to have you on board in the next episode of the Violin Podcast. And Greg, I hope to interview and actually meet you in person this time. When things open up again, then hopefully, that maybe we can go to Dublin together and grab that Guinness, because I think we could really use one right now.
Indeed. Eric, listen, I want to say thank you. You're doing such wonderful work and informing your audience and the violin audience in general. I've actually loved this, and I've loved, because it helps me verbalize certain things in my head. But you've been a great host, and keep getting great guests, and I am a subscriber.
Will do.